What's up, family? Welcome back to the channel for another video. Thank you all for so much for hanging out with me. We've had an incredible weekend. We had game night Saturday, Sunday session, Sunday morning, and then the ex-pastor call-in show Sunday evening. And then yesterday, I just decided to do a live. I normally don't do videos on the first Mondays just because the first weekends are obviously so busy. But man, we had some trolls that I felt like it was a good teaching moment. So went live yesterday. If you haven't caught that, please go check out that video. It was amazing. And this is a good moment to remind you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell so you can be notified, especially when I go live, but also when I drop new videos. And of course, consider joining, supporting, or connecting with this community, channel, or content in any way that makes sense for you, right? And then last but not least, check out our books. You see them there. Just released a new one. It'll be out on Black Friday. It's called Black Nonbelievers Next Door, and it's somewhat of a memoir, which I really do enjoy writing those. I like writing about me. Does that make me a narcissist? Whatever. All right. And of course, check out our merch because we do have some of the dopest merch in the game. Our Keep Responsibly, I was about to say Keep Responsibly. Our Think Responsibly hoodie is selling like hotcakes. I haven't had hotcakes in a while, now that I think about it. But sure, hey, go check it out. You can check it out directly on YouTube, or you can check it out at Window Shop. That's window with a Y, WYNDOW, shop.dldd.us. And you can see everything that we have to offer. So check it out. All right. So today we're going to have a conversation about a book, which I really do enjoy doing these. Basically, I'm just kind of walking through some of the books that I've read or some of the books that I've been introduced to, and books that I think cover some content that I think is conversation worthy. And in this case, much like the title of this video, this book is about a preacher who lost his faith. The name of this book is Losing Faith in Faith, From Preacher to Atheist. I mean, it sounds like a book I could have written myself, right? I think one of my earliest videos that I started doing on this channel regarding this content, I think it was like From Faith to Atheism. I think that was pretty much how that was, an ex-pastor's journey type thing. But in this case, instead of it being about me, this is an autobiographical book by Dan Barker, and it was published in 1992. Whew, 1992. I was still a very young whippersnapper. I think my baby sister was born in 1993. But Dan Barker is a very interesting character to me, someone that I attached to immediately because he was one of the first atheists who's alive that I had been introduced to who was a former pastor. Or a former preacher, former minister, and particularly in the evangelical world. So that, it kind of felt like home a little bit to me. So this book was actually pretty good. That's why I was excited about kind of walking through this. So the work chronicles Barker's personal journey from being a devout evangelical Christian minister to becoming an atheist and a prominent advocate for secularism and free thought. Sounds like Dan and I have had a similar journey, although sounds like his happened a lot earlier than mine did. So Dan Barker is a former Christian preacher who spent 19 years in evangelical ministry. After leaving the faith, he became the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting the separation of church and state and educating the public about non-theism. Now, Losing Faith in Faith combines personal narratives with critical analysis of religion. Barker shares his experiences with within Christian ministry, detailing his deep involvement in preaching, missionary work, and Christian music composition. The book is divided into sections that alternate between autobiographical accounts and discussions on theological and philosophical topics. So what I've done here is grabbed a few key themes, and we're going to talk through them. We're going to talk through this content a little bit. So the first one, of course, just kind of from preacher to atheist, a major theme in this book is his personal journey from faith to atheism. Barker describes his upbringing in a Christian family and his early commitment to faith, which led him to become an ordained minister. Dan grew up in a deeply religious family where faith was integral to daily life. From an early age, he exhibited a strong passion for Christianity, immersing himself in church activities and studying the Bible diligently. His commitment was so profound that by the age of 15, he felt a calling to serve God through ministry. Now, this part is somewhat similar to my own story. The only difference is my family, I would not describe them as deeply religious. I'd describe them as culturally religious. And my family was so dysfunctional that I lived with so many different people as a child that their faith just, it didn't have time to be an integral part of my life. However, I did end up developing a passion for Christianity in my very early ages, and I've kind of shared that story. Why it was almost the opposite reason. I wanted Jesus to save me. I didn't go to Jesus because my family was so, was such Jesus freaks. I went to Jesus because I wanted Jesus to save my family, because it was obviously these people were kind of fucked up. But much like him, I did ended up feeling a call to serve God through ministry as early as 11 years old. He began preaching sermons. I'm about to tell my story now. Dan Barker, began preaching sermons to his peers and community, demonstrating a natural aptitude for evangelism. This was also something that I immediately started doing. My first sermons weren't preached in a pulpit. They were preached in the park, in the schoolyard. They were preached at school. Yikes. I started several campus ministries. That was where my work began, man, which is why by the time I transitioned back into the church space, church folk couldn't tell me nothing. Like I was already putting in the work, which made me somewhat of an anomaly. All right. So, his early devotion led him to attend a Bible college where he furthered his theological education and prepared for a life dedicated to spreading the Christian message. Now, my life just didn't have enough privilege for me to be able to go to Bible college, because back then you couldn't really do Pell Grants or anything like that with most of those colleges, and nor should you really. Just honestly, it would have been a waste of my fucking money, well, actually the taxpayers' money in that case. But either way, I'm kind of glad they don't. I'm glad I didn't go. But I really wanted to. His unwavering belief in the literal truth of the Bible and the importance of salvation through Jesus Christ set the foundation for his initial career as a minister. And absolutely, my life, my direction from the time I was 11 till the time that I was 28 was guided by this idea that I had been called and set apart by God, and that I had an obligation to serve him. And that was my righteous obligation, one that I did so proudly, one that I did so fiercely and sincerely. And when I say sincerely, I mean sincerely in the sense of genuineness. Like I was very genuine about what I was trying to accomplish with my faith, and I wanted to have as accurate understanding of it as possible. And I believe that the Bible was the literal truth. I didn't believe that it was literally accurate, but I believe that within it, there was literal truth. And this is why sometimes when people who are not Christians, but still believe the Bible has some type of hidden or deeper meaning in it, I'm like, bruh, I've been there. You know what I'm saying? I'm not interested in going back down that rabbit hole. You can go there by yourself. But yeah, so I identify with Barker's journey, like almost immediately, right? This is definitely, we have a similar story. He also recounts his years spent preaching, evangelizing, and composing Christian music, highlighting his dedication to spreading the gospel. After becoming an ordained minister, Barker dedicated 19 years to various forms of evangelical work. He served as a pastor in churches, traveled as an evangelist, and participated in missionary activities, both domestically and internationally. Barker was not only a preacher, but also a talented musician and composer of Christian music. He wrote numerous hymns and songs that were performed in churches and at religious events, aiming to inspire faith and devotion in others. His compositions often reflected his theological beliefs and were used as tools for evangelism. Barker's ministry was characterized by enthusiasm and a tireless work ethic. He frequently conducted revival meetings, Bible studies, and outreach programs intended to convert non-believers and strengthen the faith of existing Christians. His dedication to spreading the gospel was a central aspect of his identity and during identity during these years. Man, again, I felt like I could be reading this out of my own book. Um, I became an ordained minister at 12. And then I got ordained several other times after that because churches are so conflicted, and many of them don't know the way that it's viewed outside of their church. So different organizations that I was a part of always required a different ordination process or something. And after a while, I was just like, to hell with it. Um, but yeah, you get ordained and you get active. You get ordained typically because you already are active and somebody else recognizes that. And I think that's one of the things why so many trolls are attracted to content like mine, because it's hard to say that, oh, well, you weren't a real Christian. I don't care if you say it. No true Scotsman's fallacies don't work on me. So I don't care if you say it. But it's really hard to say. It's hard to say that about people like Dan and I, where if you Google hard enough, you can find old clips of us preaching and just giving our hearts out. And, my church was heavily involved in outreach. I mean, we were constantly doing something, whether it was giving out McDoubles from McDonald's, gas giveaways, giving out clothes to the homeless, showing up at clubs and giving out condoms and stuff. Yes, we were a different type of church for sure. But we were I was very enthusiastic and passionate about my faith. And so, but it's not just that. I realize I am a very passionate, enthusiastic person about anything that I attach myself to. So when people are like shocked that, oh man, you keep doing all this stuff about atheism, like what made you think I'd be a different person? I was this passionate. I was this passionate and enthusiastic about the bullshit. Why wouldn't I be this passionate and enthusiastic about the truth? Come on now, you know. But yes, missionary activities. Mine were mainly domestically. Again, I didn't really have the privilege for international missionary work, but definitely did a lot of domestic missionary work. I was indeed a talented musician. Well, I wouldn't call myself a talented musician. I was a good musician. I was a decent musician. I could make some things happen, right? But I mainly play for me, which ended up serving me well because I don't really play to impress other people, and I was a deep Christian. So I played for the Lord. I played to spend time with him, which made me a very influential worship leader at times in my ministry and in my ministry relationship. I didn't write hymns because I didn't like hymns, but that's likely the age difference, the age gap between Dan and I, and as well as the cultural difference between Dan and I. But I've written, oh my goodness, I've written so many Christian worship songs, and we've performed them at my churches. Other people have performed them at their churches. I wrote a song fresh out of high school called "God Chaser" that ended up getting performed like at all the local churches around here. That's how passionate I was about this. And definitely that tireless work ethic, man. And then we had outreach programs 4 days. And then he also talks about his doubts and questioning. The narrative explores the gradual emergence of doubts as Barker delves deeper into biblical studies and encounters conflicting interpretations, which I often describe the moment you become genuine about your faith, regardless of what the religious persuasion is. The moment you become genuine, and when I say genuine, I mean that you become deeply invested, that you get to the point where you say, no, I want to understand this. I want to know it in and out. I want to know the truth of it. God, I want to know you. I want to know you for myself, as we used to say it in my community. You got to know God for yourself now. Can't know God through your grandmama. You got to know God through yourself. But the moment people actually start doing that, they enter into a state of deconstruction. Now, whether they completely deconstruct to the point of deconversion is an entire matter altogether. But the moment a person becomes genuine about their religious faith, they enter into a moment of deconstruction. This is why I often describe my experience, because people say, well, when did you start deconstructing? And I was like, I started deconstructing the day I started believing, because that's the day that I had to start wrestling with these things that were hard to believe. And so I would have to convince myself to believe these things on faith until I could get a better understanding. That's a state of deconstructing. Your mind is already telling you something about this is not believable, and that's why you find it necessary to suspend your belief, even if it's temporary. You know. So over time, Barker began to experience internal conflicts as he delved deeper into biblical studies and theological reflections. His doubts emerged gradually, initially sparked by noticing contradictions and inconsistencies within the Bible, because you can't get through the first 3 chapters of the Bible without a variety of inconsistencies and contradictions just in the first 3 chapters, you know. Now, granted, Genesis is not the earliest written book of the Bible, but they put it first, so that's where you start. Um, For example, he wrestled with differing accounts of the same events in the Gospels and questioned the moral implications of certain Old Testament stories that depicted violence commanded by God. Barker also struggled with the concept of eternal damnation for non-believers, finding it difficult to reconcile with the notion of a loving and just deity. And just again to kind of point out this, to kind of go back to a retroject, this idea of the moment you get genuine about your faith, you're already in the state or process of deconstructing. Um, the issue of eternal damnation was something that I had put on the shelf for the majority of my career as a Christian minister. Even as an early believer, the idea of an eternal damnation was incompatible not only with this idea of a loving God, but I didn't actually find that the way other preachers talked about it represented in scripture itself. Like there were some things that you could stretch and say, oh yeah, this is that. But in order to do that, you'd have to be dealing with the books that are more cryptic, and you don't even know what those books are talking about. That's the point of being cryptic, you know. And these people were just high, but that's a whole nother other story. But so because of that, eternal damnation was not an issue for me, and for the most part, because it was already something. And when I say not an issue, what I mean was it wasn't something that I gave much thought to, because I knew it was something that I couldn't reconcile. And not only was it something that I couldn't reconcile, it was something that I knew if I thought about too much, that I'd have to wrestle with that lack of reconciliation. And so those things, you kind of train yourself. And that's why I say a state of deconstructing. You train yourself to put the stuff that doesn't make sense on the back burner until you can no longer do so. So now when I got to the point of deconversion, that's when I finally allowed myself to have that conversation with myself about how I felt about this idea of God eternally punishing anybody, or anybody eternally punishing anybody. It's overkill, to be sure. It's excessive. But again, so once I deconverted, it was just like, oh no, this God sucks. That's pretty much where that went, because I had 20 plus years of wrestling with what this God was, and was not. Engaging in discussions with fellow clergy and scholars exposed him to alternative interpretations and critical perspectives that fueled his skepticism. That's another thing that led to me describing my experience as being a deconstruction process for the whole time, because like I had a lot of conversations. And remember, I got into this very young, and so I'd be 12 and 13 sitting in the room with what we called elder statesmen, which means these are bishops and apostles, quote unquote, deacons and ministers who've been in the game, for, according to them, for decades at that time. I did later find out that many of them had just got in recently, and others of them, were just really kind of like pimps, which is one of the reasons, like, I got away from the traditional church. I know people think the mega churches are the ones that are bad. And I mean, yeah, they're bad. There are a few that are just horrible, like yikes. But honestly, and I've not been secretive about this. I've said this as much as I can. The most damage is not being done in those glamorous churches. You know what I'm saying? I mean, think about it though. When you look at most cults, they're not these glamorous places. You know, the most done that's being the most damage, in my opinion, that's being done in churches is coming from these traditional churches and these small little country churches that nobody wants to talk about. Everybody's overlooking those because they're not as sensationalized to talk about. Everybody wants to sensationalize the mega church pastors because, to be honest, you're childish in that way. Somebody shows you something shiny and you know absolutely nothing about that world, but because you've heard so many rumors, you think you know something. But yet there's these little country churches right there in your neighborhood where women are getting abused and you don't even give a damn. Which I've talked about this in a video about that leapfrogging bullshit, where you leapfrog over issues that you can actually do something about to talk about issues that don't have a damn thing to do with you. Yeah, secular people are guilty of that shit too. I mean, don't you sit there and make that face at me. This is real. Like we need to grow up. I'm not that person that's just gonna be like, oh yeah, everything's anti-church, and I'm like, no, I'm anti-superstition. Period. Whether it's coming from believers or non-believers, and I'm anti anything that's not progressive and that's not moving us forward. And there's a lot of conversations right now that I'm seeing had in both the secular community and the superstitious community that are just there's no utility. So yeah, but no, having conversations with these more traditional pastors, it was frightening for me. And again, that's why I separated hard from the traditional church, like hard. I didn't want anything to do with them. Much of my critiques about Christianity comes from the things that I've noticed in those churches, because those churches have more control over their people. It is hard to exercise control in a megachurch. And I've talked about this. The people that you should be most concerned for in a megachurch are the staff, not the members. The members do whatever the fuck they want to do. I promise you. The staff at mega churches, especially the ones that are the closest to the pastors, those are the ones that you got to be worried about sometimes, because in some contexts they get a heavy hand of abuse that they're tied to because they're getting paid by their abuser. And that's why I say a lot of the arguments that people make against these churches are completely disingenuous because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You just heard somebody gossip about something and you ran with it. That's not how critical thinking works. All right, let's continue. This is Dan Barker's story. But the big point is all interacting with other clergy members and other scholars and seeing how many different people had different interpretations about this book that was so clear. This book that is clearly the truth. And that if anybody just reads it for themselves, they will all come to the understanding of the truth. But yet we have over 40,000 different denominations of different people who read it. And that's not even counting the different branches that are connected to those different denominations. And that's not even counting the different individual beliefs that are held by the members of those branches of those different denominations of this one faith. They didn't get it right here. You know what I'm saying? Is the point. And that's what people like Dan and I end up realizing and having to wrestle with, that none of the claims that we make about the book are true. You can't stand on them. I can't say that this book is objectively true if I give it to 10 different people and they come to 10 different interpretations. That's not how objectivity works. That means our whole relationship with this book is subjective. But that should not be a shocker. There is no objective interpretation of any book. The claim that one book could represent the objective truth is as fallacious as they come. And that's the scary part, is realizing once you separate that, like, oh, I've been living my life on fallacy. But that's kind of something that we talked about in yesterday's live, is that, I went through a spiel and highlighted this dude's all the fallacies he had used in just one damn paragraph. It was barely a paragraph because I think it was just two sentences. But in those two sentences, he used over like 8 fallacies, and he didn't know he did it. And as a matter of fact, he was insistent that he didn't. But then I laid that shit out there. But after I did that, I reminded people that this isn't just a weakness of believers. The majority of us are highly fallacious. Highly, you know? But yeah. He also details the intellectual journey that led him to prioritize reason and evidence over faith, ultimately resulting in his deconversion. Acknowledging his growing skepticism, Barker embarked on an intellectual journey to seek answers outside the confines of his religious beliefs. He began reading works by philosophers, scientists, and secular authors who promoted rationalism and critical thinking. Influential figures such as Bertrand Russell and Richard Dawkins provided perspectives that resonated with his emerging worldview. Barker applied the same critical scrutiny to his faith that he had previously reserved for other belief systems, leading him to conclude that there was insufficient evidence to support the existence of God or the supernatural claims of Christianity. This realization was both liberating and challenging, as it meant leaving behind a lifelong vocation and community. Ultimately, Barker chose to prioritize reason and evidence over faith. Publicly announcing his deconversion, he redirected his passion toward advocating for secularism, free thought, and the separation of church and state. His embrace of reason marked a significant transformation in his life, reshaping his identity and purpose. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I know one thing that really stood out to me in this section was just ended up deciding to embrace his skepticism. And that was a major journey for me, was giving myself the freedom to embrace my skepticism. Um, and that started long before I deconverted. I was definitely deconstructing, because I remember it started as giving myself the freedom to finally kind of be skeptical started in 2014. 20, no, wow, I'm way up. 2004. It's either 2000, maybe 2005. Because I remember being in an issue with the pastor, and he was very upset with me. And normally I just kind of do whatever the pastor said. And at this moment, I was becoming very skeptical of pastoral authority, to the point where I was like, I don't think God is speaking to you at all. I don't think God is leading you. I don't think you're immune from being a jackass. And so I think that likely you're just being a jackass right now, and I'm going to respond accordingly. That was probably the first part of my active skepticism. But then it moved on to I got to the place. I think I shared with y'all that I used to be the type of preacher who laid hands on people and performed healings. I used to cast out devils and stuff like that. I became highly skeptical of other people doing those things, which I even became skeptical of what was happening when I thought I was doing those things. And I've shared those stories in other interviews. And so I stopped doing those things while still being a Christian, still believing that God heals, still believing that God, casted devils out and stuff like that. But the place where I had got to in my theology, well, if God does it, then God is going to have to do it. I'm not going to be doing it. I'm not going to be setting myself up for that. Because my thinking was for casting out devils, I was like, how do I not know if I'm not messing with someone's mental issues? You know what I'm saying? Because that's the thing that I became subtly aware of, that some of these things that we were calling demonic episodes were mental health episodes, and I'm sitting here aggravating the hell out of it, with my anointing oil and all of my shandas and hundas. And then I also thought about the people who would leave my meetings who didn't get healed, or who didn't experience that moment of euphoria, and how they would feel about themselves after leaving those meetings. So I became very skeptical of the idea of doing healing meetings. And so that skepticism typically starts long before the deconversion happens. It's what allows you to get there. You become skeptical of quite a bit. I became skeptical of the divinity of Jesus early. I became skeptical of Jesus as a Messiah early. Um, like, man, but that's how that goes. But very much like Dan, um, once I kind of deconverted, it was liberating and it was challenging. I had to leave behind everything that I had built up. Um, and I talk a little bit about this in Black Nonbelievers. Um, I just started an organization for pastors called P3, that had over 300 pastors in that organization. Like, I just started it the year that I determined that, nope, I'm fully deconverting. I was in the middle of planning that organization's first conference because it had grown so fast, you know. Um, yeah, it was from a vocational perspective. I was a rising star in ministry at the moment that I made the decision to no longer be a part. I was at the point where I could leave my church and go take a job at almost any other church that was doing well. You know, which is actually what I ended up doing. And you probably heard that story. All right. So Barker also has a critical examination of religion. He analyzes the inconsistencies and contradictions within the Bible, questioning its reliability as a moral and factual God, which you've known I've done a lot of that. Dan Barker dedicates a significant portion of his book to analyzing inconsistencies and contradictions, which led him to question the reliability. For instance, he examines conflicting accounts of the resurrection in the Gospels, noting discrepancies in who discovered the empty tomb, the number of angels present, and Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. Barker also critiques the differing genealogies of Jesus presented in Matthew and Luke, highlighting how these contradictions challenge the Bible's inerrancy. And that's a great point. Those things were less of an issue for me because of the type of churches that I was a part of. They had already done the tricknology on this. Well, no, these are just them telling their different perspectives, and they don't have to get it exactly right for it to be the truth, And it's, of course, that's bullshit. But what was more for me was the fact that when you read the character of Jesus, he's not a good guy. And that, that was just like this eternal damnation thing was on the shelf for me for a long time. Jesus as not being a good person was something I had realized almost immediately when reading the scripture. John 3:16 was never a good scripture to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there were attachments that everybody else had that was literally masking for me, like being say, oh, one of the most loving scriptures in the world is, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. How is killing your son an act of love? Hello, but then, like I said, Jesus, he advocates for the poor giving their last to the church. He consistently gives these parables that punishes poor people, specifically poor people who are not shrewd in how they do business. The parable of the talents is about rewarding those who are shrewd in business matters. Yeah. Which is why sometimes when people are like, oh, Jesus was super socialist and communist, I'm like, what fucking book were you reading? Like, no, you sound just as goofy as the Christians, man. He told other people to live like socialists. He wasn't trying to do that. That's not what he was doing. When Peter asked about using the money from the treasury that they had gained from the people to feed the people, he said, no, go see what they got among them. So even though they're giving us these offerings, instead of us using these offerings to take care of them, Let's just take what they have and make that shit stretch. Ah, bet you never saw that in the story before, did you? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Yep, I'm gonna help you. Additionally, he delves into moral issues depicted in the scriptures, such as the endorsement of slavery, genocide, and the subjugation of women. Barker discusses passages where God commands violent actions against entire populations, including women and children, which he finds incompatible with the notion of a benevolent deity. These explorations underscore his argument that the Bible cannot be considered a consistent or reliable source of moral guidance. And I mean, and these things are absolutely obvious, right? When you The only way to read the Bible and come to the conclusion that God is a good character and Jesus is a good character as well is to for someone have told you before you read the book that, hey, these two people are the good guys, and if you don't think they're good guys, you're the bad guy. And that is the presupposition that most people are introduced to the Bible with. So you never actually get to read it with the freedom to critique these characters. You know, like you get to call the devil evil, wicked, and you have just no evidence of it in the scriptures. The worst he does is ask Jesus to do some stuff, and Jesus says no, and he's just like, all right. That's literally what happens, man. It's like, how do you read this book and come off with this dude who only shows up like because most of the times the things that we say is the devil in the Bible is not. Like the serpent is not the devil. I don't know how you got that. The only way you could have gotten that is someone would have had to tell you that the serpent is the devil, because the Bible doesn't say that the serpent is the devil. But this is the thing that I often remind people of, that the majority of beliefs that people have about the Bible don't actually come from the Bible. That's a whole nother story. All right. In the book, Barker contrasts faith-based belief systems with rational skepticism, advocating for an evidence-based understanding of the world. He shares personal anecdotes about how he initially accepted religious teachings without question, relying on faith as a virtue. However, as he begins to apply critical thinking to his belief, he recognized that faith often requires accepting claims without sufficient evidence. And listen, that's the thing that the rest of us know now, is that there is no sufficient evidence. There has never been any sufficient evidence. So what we do know is that anybody who believes this without sufficient evidence. And the person's going to say, well, no, I do have sufficient evidence because I have experiences that nobody else can explain. All right. Well, number one, experiences that you have by yourself subjectively are not sufficient evidence. And number two, anything that cannot be explained is definitely not evidence. So you kind of just chopped your head off and stood on it to make yourself taller, and that shit does not work. You just shot yourself in the foot, bro. When you say my evidence is I've had experiences that can't be explained, you're saying I have experiences that I'm not qualified to speak to. Therefore, I cannot have an opinion or an attachment to a belief about those experiences because they cannot be explained. I'm just trying to help you out a little bit. Don't do that shit. Don't. There's better shit to say than that. That's low on the totem pole. Don't reach for that one. Reach a little higher. Stop going for the cookies on the low shelf. Okay. When you walk in the grocery store, everything on the bottom of is all shiny and colorful and got cartoons on it. That's for the kids. You don't reach for that shit. Okay. Reach a little higher. Let's go. Barker discusses how reason and the scientific method often offer more reliable pathways to understanding reality. He provides examples of how natural phenomena once attributed to divine intervention have been explained through scientific discovery. By emphasizing the importance of questioning and evidence, Barker argues that reason leads to a more accurate and honest comprehension of the universe than faith does. And the thing that I think, I speak for us Pentecostal evangelicals. I think the thing that we thought we had was a better understanding of the world than everybody else. And a part of what protected that belief was the echo chamber of Christianity, And so, and this is something that I warn people about today, because there are a lot of people out here because of the echo chamber of Christianity who've been able to platform themselves as scientists who are not scientists. They've been able to platform themselves as psychologists who are not psychologists. But then you've also had people, because of this, who went through school, got the degree, and don't care about anything that they learned. They got it just to say that they have it so that they can certify the bullshit that they're going to offer people. You know? Separation of church and state is a big thing, but we've got to find a way to separate church from science. You know? All right, so, but yeah, I had to bring that in there. But yeah, realizing that once I realized that, like, oh snap, the stuff that I thought I knew, I had no understanding of the knowing of. It was just, oh, God revealed this. God revealed this. God is showing this. And then you begin to realize, like, oh no, there's actually stuff we can study. There's actually stuff we can observe. There's actually stuff we can test. That's definitely more reliable than just saying, "Ooh, I got a feeling that that a voice in my head just revealed something to me that I have no way to test," and that this idea that I have, and that's the thing that it really creates. This is why I don't get into metaphysical debates at all with people, because of what you're arguing for has no utility in the real world. I don't give a damn. You know, like, you can say, so, but how do you know the world is real? Okay, so if I stop and I consent and I say, you know what, the world isn't real, what the fuck changed? Nothing. So that's a useless argument. You know? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to help. All right, I got to get through this. Okay. So he also, in exploring how ethical principles can exist independently of religious doctrines, he argues that morality is a human construct rooted in empathy, social cooperation, and the well-being of conscious beings. He shares insight into how societies develop moral codes based on mutual benefit and the avoidance of harm rather than divine commandments. And oftentimes, many of the debates or many of the arguments and claims that believers make, especially those who are more apologetic, that they make can be destroyed with basic observation. You know? Everybody doesn't have the capacity to do deep research into societal development, but almost everybody has a front row seat into children growing up, whether it's your own children or somebody else's children. And you can literally watch how those children develop their sense of morality long before they've been introduced to a concept of God. But you can also do the same thing even with evolution. People say, well, when can you ever show that any one thing is changing into another thing? Well, sperm and egg is not a human. Hello. And then sperm and egg becomes something. And what it becomes is not a human. It takes it a while to become a human. And while it does not exactly mimic the evolutionary lineage of the human being, it does mirror the evolutionary process. You know, from conception to birth, show anybody the chart. That's one of the clearest and most beautiful views you can get for evolution. You know, in a way that a layman could understand it. Realizing that our birth, from conception to birth, we are evolving. It's a beautiful thing. And there's no reason to believe that we've stopped evolving. Now, that's a whole nother conversation. That's in my speculative world. All right. Barker addresses the impact of religion on social issues. He emphasizes the importance of separating religious influence from governmental affairs to protect individual freedoms and promote a pluralistic society. He discusses instances where religious doctrines have hindered progress or infringed upon human rights, such as opposition to LGBTQ plus rights, restrictions on reproductive health, and the promotion of creationism in public education. And for anybody who's a part of the LGBTQ plus community, I know you're not the spokesman of the community, but I'm wondering, because sometimes in my notes, I just say the pride community, or Pride community writes, and that's because I don't want to mess up the acronyms most times. That's my neurospicy. But please let me know if saying the Pride community is offensive. Holla at your boy. And as opposed to LGBTQ plus, because I know some people do LGBTQIA plus. But yeah, holla at your boy. Let me know. And the promotion of creationism in public education. Now, this is an alarm that I've been sounding for a while on my channel. This is a big issue. There are way too many science teachers in the United States of America who are teaching creationism in schools. And like, man, you don't understand the audacity of believers that they have in this country. And so there are many people who become teachers to spread their faith. Okay. And 9 times out of 10, their husband is a cop. I'm not saying that means anything, but I'm just saying it. All right, let's go. And then, of course, he obviously advocates for free thought. He shares his experience working with Freedom from Religion, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, highlighting legal cases where government entities improperly endorsed or supported religious activities. It happens all the time. He argues that a secular government ensures equality for all citizens, regardless of their beliefs, and prevents any single religion from imposing its doctrine on others. By advocating for the separation of church and state, Barker underscores the need to uphold constitutional principles that protect both religious freedom and secular governance. Throughout the book, he also encourages readers to think critically and independently, urging them to question traditional beliefs that are often accepted without scrutiny. He provides examples of how accepting beliefs without evidence can lead to harmful consequences, such as the rejection of scientific understanding or the perpetuation of discriminatory practices justified by religious texts. By promoting rational inquiry and evidence-based reasoning, Barker empowers readers to take ownership of their beliefs and make informed decisions. He emphasizes that questioning established norms is a vital part of personal growth and the pursuit of truth. One thing that I do want to add here is in the book he highlights that how accepting these beliefs without evidence can lead to harmful consequences. He highlights such as the rejection of scientific understanding or the perpetuation of discriminatory practices justified by religious texts. I want to highlight that often the rejection of scientific understanding works with the perpetuation of discriminatory practices. Man, there are certain issues that have been exacerbated, either one, doesn't fucking matter to me, in our community due to a rejection of medical science. And which has led to a disinterest in more people from my community becoming interested, invested in medical science. So then that leaves less people at the table in medical science who will be concerned and invested in the difference that may exist. That's how the rejection of scientific understanding works with the perpetuation of discriminatory practices. Okay. But I also want to add because he highlights justified by religious texts. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. It's not the text that justifies the rejection of scientific understanding. The text is believing in the text is the slippery slope. Because then what they typically use, these other beliefs that these believers attach themselves to, oftentimes don't come from the religious text itself. It comes from the permission to believe bullshit in the first place. All right. Barker highlights the significance of forming communities centered around shared values of reason, compassion, and humanistic principles rather than religious affiliation. He discusses his involvement in organizing conferences, meetings, and social events for atheists, agnostics, and free thinkers. These gatherings provide support and fellowship for individuals who may feel isolated due to their lack of religious belief, especially in areas where religiosity is prevalent. Honestly, I've enjoyed this so much. This is so cool. So he shares, he reflects on his atheism, kind of talks about his life after faith, because that is the book, Losing Faith in Faith. But he shares insights into his life. After leaving his long-held religious beliefs, he discusses the challenges he faced when transitioning from a respected evangelical minister to a non-believer. He describes those feelings of isolation and the loss of community that initially accompanied his deconversion. Friends and former colleagues often reacted with shock, disappointment, or judgment, questioning his morality and sanity. And that's what I got. Definitely for the first 4 years, that people were beginning to realize that I was not a Christian anymore, and that I was pulling away from those beliefs, and that and the few pastor friends that I shared it with, oh no, they were not shy about thinking that I was crazy. And for years, I kind of closeted myself, and after that, I realized, like, no, I'm not gonna let the people with an imaginary friend treat me like I'm the crazy one. Fuck that shit. And that's why I got up, you know. But despite these difficulties, Barker found liberation and authenticity in embracing atheism. He speaks about the relief of no longer having to reconcile contradictory doctrines or defend problematic aspects of his former faith. Barker highlights how his relationships evolved, noting that while some connections were strained, others deepened as he cultivated friendships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than religious affiliation. Again, that is a privilege that I did not have. All right, so kind of wrapping this up here, I want to share some final insights from him. And this I'm just going to read through because this is so good. These are my notes about because the last theme that I wanted to pull from here is the purpose, sense of purpose and meaning. In exploring how one can find purpose, joy, and fulfillment without reliance on religious frameworks, Barker shares personal experiences that illustrate a rich and meaningful life post-faith. He discusses how he redefined his sense of purpose by focusing on the here and now, embracing the finite nature of life as motivation to make the most of each moment. Barker describes engaging in activities that bring him joy and contribute positively to society. For example, he continued his passion for music by composing secular songs that celebrate life and human experience. He found fulfillment in advocating for civil liberties and the separation of church and state, seeing his work with the Freedom from Religion Foundation as a way to protect individual rights and promote fairness. He also emphasizes the importance of personal relationships, finding deep satisfaction in connections with family and friends based on love, respect, and shared experiences rather than religious obligation. Barker illustrates that morality and ethics can be grounded in empathy and reason, leading to a compassionate and responsible way of living. By pursuing interests that align with his values and contributing to the well-being of others, Barker demonstrates that a meaningful life does not require belief in a deity. Instead, purpose can be self-determined and derived from the appreciation of life's intrinsic value and the desire to make a positive impact. And man, just that aspect of purpose being self-determined. Self-determination was a major part of my journey. Many of you know that I lean towards Black nationalism, and self-determination is a very core principle of Black nationalism. But what you realize that a lot of those principles in Black nationalism, it's all about autonomy, you know, and that's why it was so close to my deconversion journey, because my deconversion journey wasn't just about deconverting; it was about liberation. I think that's a good closing point. So if you've never read this book before, Losing Faith in Faith, From Preacher to Atheist, is a compelling exploration of one man's transformation from a devoted minister to an advocate for atheism and secularism. Dan Barker's journey highlights the complexities of faith, the challenges of confronting deeply held beliefs, and the possibilities that emerge when embracing reason and evidence. The book invites readers to reflect on their own beliefs, encourages open-minded inquiry, and contributes to ongoing conversations about the role of religion in individual lives and society at large. And what you really have here is another example of someone who firmly believed that this was the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And once they determined to do more than believe, but to actually get an understanding, which is biblically honorable, because one of the wisdom books says, in all of your getting, get understanding. And it seems that when those who are the most sincere about their faith actually go on that journey to get understanding, what they find is a fallacious book of lies. All right, just playing. That's one way to say it, but no, what they ultimately find is themselves. What they find is that they have been the voice guiding them this whole time. And it's time to grow up and join the real world and actually wrestle with the chaos, the complexity, and the community that awaits us all. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you haven't already, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell so that you get notified, and consider joining, supporting, or connecting with this community, channel, or content in any way that makes sense for you. Also, check out our books. You can find them on Amazon. Type in my name, Darante LaMar, or my wife's name, Darnea, and you'll find them. And you can check out our merch. You can check it out right here on YouTube on my page, or you can go to windowshop.dldd.us, and that's window with a Y. I think that's all I have for you now. So until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful if you can. I'll holler at you.